Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And I have a spectacular guest with me today. His story is absolutely incredible. His name is Jack Sernett, and he is a professional keynote speaker and certified mindset coach who has overcome many obstacles in his 29 years of life, which include battling a chronic illness, spending over 800 days in the hospital, having 22 surgeries, mental health challenges, an eating disorder, and more. He sincerely believes these obstacles have been put in his life to provide him with the opportunity to grow instead of go through adversity. And now it is his life's work to teach as many people as possible how to overcome adversity, eliminate the victim mentality, and improve their mental health by sharing his story and positive message of hope and healing at universities, colleges, high schools, middle schools, conferences, and events. Jack, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure for sure. It's a pleasure.
You have just such an amazing story, and I do want to just let the listeners know, for those of them who are listening to it just on the audio and not looking at the video on YouTube, that you are the absolute picture of health and vitality. That this bio that I just read really does not suit the image of the person that I'm looking at right now.
Yeah, it's funny how that works. So I'm 6'5", which you probably can't even tell just on the camera. I'm 6'5", almost 230 pounds. I got tattoos everywhere. However, to your point, I've got tubes, scars, zipper scars everywhere, some internal, chronic kidney issues. So
Oh,
you never want to judge a book by its cover. Obviously, at times in my life, I have looked differently.
mhm.
During some of these health challenges, I've gone from 250 pounds down to 170 in 3 months. So it's just been
Wow.
a whirlwind of body composition. You know what I mean? But yeah, right now it's interesting. My clients or my audiences I speak in front of, or podcast hosts who
Mhm.
interview me, it kind of seems hard to believe if you just look at me from like the chest up, or if you just look at me with like a shirt on. It's kind of hard to tell. You know what I'm saying? So
Mhm.
yeah, it's an interesting observation you made for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you look like an athlete. I mean, just looking at your shoulders. I mean,
Yeah.
they're so broad, and again, everything, you just look like maybe you just came home from the gym, or you're ready to step out onto the football field.
Yeah, no, yeah. So I do personal training as a part time in some of my work with clients, and so I am in the gym. I use it as therapy, but obviously, um, it has changed over the years because of my some of my adversities that have been thrown into my life. But yeah, right now it would definitely be interesting if you put me in a lineup like next to people and you explained that resume. They probably wouldn't pick me. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Because it just
Hmm.
based off the looks, it doesn't really match up. So.
Hmm. Well, it's interesting that you said that you go to the gym as therapy. So my next question would be, are you using it as kind of like physical therapy or mental health therapy? How do you use that as
Yeah,
therapy?
Yeah, so both. So part of the struggle for me over the years was I used to the gym used to be my crutch, and my identity was my sports and my
Mhm.
lifting weights and how I could perform as an athlete. That's the only thing I got joy from. By virtue of things that have happened in my life, I have had the opportunity to get better at finding other ways to find peace and joy and
Mhm.
therapy besides the gym. So when the gym gets taken away, I'm not just a depressed, sad little boy. So
Mhm.
it's been a learning process along the way. I used to be a competitive CrossFit athlete. I was a high level soccer player and multiple sport athlete growing up. So that was my one and only thing. And when I got injured or sick or I couldn't play, all of a sudden my identity was taken away. And so now it's one of the many things I use as therapy, both for physical therapy because of injuries or post
Mhm.
surgery stuff, also for like mental health. It just is such a good thing to move and get those endorphins going.
Mhm.
However, it's not the only way I can find peace and joy. Does that make sense?
Mhm. It
If I
makes
missed
perfect
one
sense.
workout in the past, if I missed one workout, I'd like panic. Whereas now
Mhm.
it's like no big deal. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So that is,
Absolutely.
it's been an interesting sort of self-discovery process along the way with
Mhm.
my own fitness and health as well.
Mhm.
If I can't do the thing I love the most, which is working
Mhm.
out, I have other things now that I've learned to implement into my life, which has been great because
Mhm.
I think you're very vulnerable if you only have one thing that brings you joy. You know what I mean?
Mhm,
Or if you're just attached to one outcome or one hobby. So it's been a
mhm.
blessing in disguise. But yeah, right now it's both mental health, physical health, a little physical therapy,
Mhm.
kind of all sprinkled in.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that about having more than one thing that you're passionate about or that brings you joy, because I think that's a really important point to make for the listeners, that if you do have a variety of different activities and maybe they're not physical activities the way you want them to be. I was a chronic pain patient when I was in my mid 30s. Also, I'm a ballet dancer, not professional, but going to ballet class was really my thing. I'd go at least 4 or 5 days a week, but then I was sidelined. I couldn't do that, and I was so depressed and so unhappy for so long. And then finally I started hiking. I live at the foot of the Colorado Rocky Mountains. Never hiked, and that actually was something I could do without exacerbating my pain, and it opened up a whole new world. So I think that was a really important point to make.
No, I agree 100%. And that's amazing. Your story is one of many people, I'm sure, kind of a similar outcome where they've had to pivot almost by default because they
Hmm.
realize, like, all right, I'm stuck. How do I get unstuck? Let's pivot and try to find something else that can scratch that itch for some peace and joy. So yeah, no, it's a great example.
Hmm. Yeah, and a lot of people just keep trying to pound away, and I did that for a long time
Yeah,
before I was able to pivot until I finally tapped out and said, "Okay, I've got to find something that works for me."
absolutely. 100%. Yeah, for me, it's been a lot of trial and error, adjusting,
Hmm.
focusing on what I can do as opposed to what
Hmm.
I can't do. I think
Hmm.
that's one of the biggest things. I have the word focus tattooed on my arm, and that's my biggest thing I try to do, particularly when it comes to the physical fitness or ballet or whatever you want to use an
Hmm.
example. I've gotten really good over the years at practicing just making my mind focus on all the things I can do instead of what I can't do or what I've lost, because that's just a waste
Hmm.
of energy, as we
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
For all the years I missed out on sports or working out, all I'd ever do is waste all the time and energy in the day to focus on, oh, I can't do this anymore. Woe is me. The whole victim
Hmm.
mentality, as you alluded to. So it's been an adjustment and also just like what I focus on as well.
Hmm. Well, I'm just going to highlight that one more time because it is so important that you are
Yeah.
focusing on your abilities instead of, in physical therapy, we focus on people's disabilities. And I do another form of therapy. I'm a Feldenkrais practitioner, and they completely flip the switch. They do not talk about people's disabilities. They talk about what they can do and
Yep.
work with that and make those parts of their lives better. And then eventually you have more things that you're capable of doing more things.
Absolutely. And my biggest thing, my goal every single day is like, okay, how can I optimize my
Hmm.
time and my energy? I would argue we only have a certain amount of energy we can use in a day. And there's
Hmm.
obviously a certain amount of time.
Hmm.
And my biggest goal is to not waste any of that time and energy on things
Hmm.
I can't change.
Hmm.
So if I was going to sit here and if me complaining about the things I can't do would magically reverse time and make it come back, I would certainly
Hmm.
do that. I'd be like
Hmm.
amazing at it.
Hmm.
But it's just a waste of my time, and it takes
Hmm.
away the peace and the joy or the ability
Hmm.
to pivot and find other things that bring me joy. So that's the biggest thing, is just like mastering the time and energy.
Hmm.
And to you said that, kind of focusing on your abilities as opposed to what you lack or your disabilities, so to speak.
Hmm. So now, when did things change for you? Because even looking through your bio, you were an athlete in high school and college, a straight A student. You were just sounded like on top of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting. If you have my resume on paper, um, it looks rather legit. You know what I mean? It doesn't look like there's much turbulence in there. For me, for whatever reason, we can get into this conversation. I've had some interesting theories from mentors or friends. I've been one of those people that since birth, kind of the wrong place, the wrong time. Like when I was born with a really bad bladder and gigantic kidneys. So already from the get go, I was kind of
Wow.
experiencing adversity from birth. It's I was it's a first world problem, right? I was born in America. It's life is good. However, right away it was like, okay, something's wrong, so to speak. And then
Mm-hmm.
pretty much ever since I can remember, injuries, black eyes, broken bones, um, up until my 23rd birthday, I would handle all these different sports injuries and surgeries and sicknesses the same way. It was like the definition of insanity. I would repeat my same response to adversity every single time, expecting a different result, but it never came. And it took me 23 years to have the foresight to be able to sit back and reflect and be like, okay, this isn't working. I need to start to pivot and adjust. And so that's what happened. So basically, from birth up until 23, it was tons of sports injuries. I could just rattle off a couple: broken foot twice, broken nose, reconstructive hip surgery, reconstructive shoulder surgery. I had compartment syndrome in my thigh. So I had 2 surgeries in my thigh. I almost had to get my leg amputated.
Oh.
Tons of different stuff. And what that did was it put me on the sidelines. And so it took away my focus from sports. So my young brain was like, all right, I can't really control what's happening to me. So what can I control? So I started to get really strict on my performance in school and then what I ate and drank. So I was like, my brain was trying to latch on to something I could control because all of these things were happening that I didn't want to happen, which is adversity, right? Something happens in your life that you don't want to happen. That's just part of being a human. For me, as a young teenager, I was thinking to myself, okay, I need to latch on to something to try to regain some level of stability. So I got very perfectionistic with grades and with what I ate and drank. The problem is, though, is throughout this process, I never voiced my struggles. I never reached out for help. And so I let one like injury from a little kid kind of roll into another one. And then it got bigger and rolled another one and another one. And so I had this basically trickle effect. If I would have started to reach out for help from a young age and like said to my parents or a therapist at school or a mentor, like, hey, I'm struggling, so much of this pain and suffering I had could have been prevented. But as a young male in America, I kind of had that toxic, if a tear's coming down your face, you got to tilt your head and swallow that tear before it drips off your face mentality. And that's just kind of what was just kind of common with the guys I was around and how I grew up. And so it's interesting how that worked out. So eventually I handled adversity very poorly. So it got worse and worse over time, which led to the perfectionism, the straight A's, the eating disorder. When I was a junior in high school, I was 6'5" like I am now, and I was 120 pounds. So I got very, very skinny. And that was the first time I couldn't hide it anymore. Right. And so
Yeah, you
that
can't
was
hide
when I was
that.
correct. When I was 17. So for the first 17 years of my life, I had a really good poker face. And from the outside looking in, my resume was amazing. Captain of the soccer team, straight A student, popular, had a lot of friends. Once I started losing weight, all the secrets sort of came out. And it was the first time I had to admit I needed help on something. And my ego was put aside. And that's where things started to turn the corner a bit. However, I still struggled with adversity. I don't really know what to do or how can I like respond properly when something happens that I don't want to happen. And then the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, put in a chronic kidney disease into my life. And so on my 23rd birthday in September of 2017, I was in San Diego. So I went to school at San Diego State University. I was enjoying my birthday dinner and I got a really big pain in my side. And at the table at my birthday dinner, all my buddies immediately turned into experts. They're like, oh, it's a kidney stone. It's this and that. You know how it works.
Yeah.
And they're all doctors all of a sudden. And I just kind of toughed it out and ate my dinner. But then by the time like midnight rolled around, I could barely stand up. So I went to the ER and they said, hey, you have a kidney infection and you have really crappy kidneys. You have stage 3 chronic kidney disease. Your bladder sucks and your 2 ureters suck. So we've got an issue here. And from that point on, then until now, so I'm 29 now, it's about 6 years ago. So September 2017, so a little over 6 years. I've had 15 different surgeries and over 800 days in the hospital, over 100 infections. I've had sepsis a couple of times. I had PICC lines in my arms. For 13 months, I had nephrostomy tubes coming out of my back. I spent over 300 days in the hospital in 2018 and over 290 in 2019. But the thing about that is, Cheryl, is like as that was happening, I started to have an opportunity to stop and reflect because I was just a vegetable in a hospital bed. I just sat there and couldn't really do anything. A lot of the meds they gave me made my vision blur, so I couldn't distract myself with TV or music or sports. And so I had a lot of just downtime of just sitting there doing nothing. And what I realized was, okay, this seems like a long-term thing. Nothing will change very quickly. I've got to get better at dealing with this. Does that make sense? And so for the first time, I'm like, okay, I can look back at my whole life. For the first 23 plus years, I've handled adversity terribly. I've done what I think is like human nature. Why me? Woe is me. This isn't fair. The whole victim mentality. You blame other
Mhm.
people in the world for your problems. For
Mhm.
the first time, I was able to sit back and reflect and start to practice responding to adversity the best way possible. And that whole like 10-90 rule, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond.
Mhm.
And just through repetition, I'm sure you've been over this with your clients and your career. You know, repetition is the mother of all skill. So as I
Mhm.
put more reps in on a daily basis of practicing
Mhm.
responding to the adversity I was facing, I got better and better at it. And I
Mhm.
started to optimize my time and energy on doing the things I can as opposed to what I can't. And
Mhm.
I ended up getting to the point where I was no longer like a feather in the wind. You know, when something
Mhm.
good happened, I was in a good mood. When something bad happened, I was in a bad mood. I
Mhm.
really took pride on being a thermostat and not a thermometer. So I was going to be in charge of what was going on between my ears. So even when a doctor came in and said, "Hey, your kidneys suck. You need this surgery, you need that surgery," I wasn't going to let that dictate my emotions, because not
Mhm.
once has any doctor, and I'm sure you've probably noticed this throughout your career, ever said, "Hey, your foot's broken. You need hip surgery. Your bladder sucks. And now you need to be stressed and depressed." They've never
Mhm.
said that. It was just how I handled the news. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I was able to start to get really good at that. And what I like to call is like post traumatic growth. And what you
Mhm.
said in the intro is I got really good at growing from it as opposed to just
Mhm.
going through it. I
Mhm.
think it takes zero skill as a human to go through tough times, because everyone has something bad that will happen. And it's
Mhm.
really easy just to have it happen and just play the victim card. I think it
Mhm.
takes a special level of preparation and skill, and a special type of mentality to grow from it, right? And to use it to your advantage. And I was lucky enough to not be able to work because I was sick in the hospital all the time. So that was my job. That was my main focus, was to get really good at
Mhm.
that. And that's where we lead today. So 29 years old, 22 surgeries, over 800 days. Just in the past 2 months, I've had two surgeries. I was in the ER this past weekend with a severe amount of pain and discomfort, but I've gotten really good at just mastering my response to adversity. And I'm lucky because I got so many opportunities to practice over the years. You know, I
Mhm.
think a lot of people, they have like one or two big things that might happen and it catches them off guard and they don't know what to do. So I was
Mhm.
lucky to have all these opportunities to fail and mess up and learn from them, to where I'm at now, where it's like, all right, no matter what happens, as long as it's not death, because I can't do anything about that, I know I can overcome it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, I know I'll handle it.
Uh-huh.
And that's a sense of confidence that you can't really fake, and that I'm very lucky to have the opportunity to have. So yeah, that was a lot of word vomit. I just spit on you right there, but that's been it for me. It was pre 23. I was the
Mhm.
king of the victim mentality, and I
Mhm.
sucked at handling adversity. And then
Mhm.
just by default and happenstance, I had a lot of downtime post 23 in the hospital
Mhm.
to practice responding to adversity and mastering my emotions. And that's where we're at today. So, and now I'm talking to you about it. So it's amazing.
Mhm. Oh, it is amazing, and I just really applaud, excuse me, your efforts and your wisdom, especially at that young of an age, with all of that that was happening to you, that you were
Yeah.
able to take charge of your own future, your own path, and how you were going to
Yeah.
deal with things. I love the fact that you said that you had the opportunity to fail and screw up, and which you did over and over again, which we all do when we're trying something new, but you never gave up.
Yeah. Yeah. My whole thing was, okay, I didn't have all this stuff happen and all these days in the hospital and all this pain for nothing. Like, I'm not going to let it go to waste. You know, I wouldn't say I'm the best Christian in the world and the most religious guy, but I do believe in God. And I just feel like I would be doing him and myself a disservice if I didn't start to try to use it for good, right? And to
Mhm.
get something out of my life, which by default will help people get something out of their life. And so it was one of those things. I'm like, I didn't come this far just to come this far. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Whereas there was times in high school where I was so narrow-minded and so addicted to the victim mentality. I was like, all right, well, life sucks. I don't want to be here anymore. I didn't have the
Mhm.
foresight I did when I got older. And, to kind of circle back, if I would have just asked for help at the beginning of my life when
Mhm.
I was young, so much of this could have been prevented, and I could have learned this stuff at an earlier age.
Mhm.
I have amazing supportive parents. I don't come from a broken home. I was never abused
Mhm.
by anyone, mentally, physically. I had that big like alpha male ego, even from a young age. Like, okay, I don't want to seem weak. I'm not gonna ask for
Mhm.
help. And that's the crazy part about this when you can look back on it. At the age of 7, I could have had opportunity right there to start to like reach out to my parents and say, hey, like this is really messing with me. I'm stressing, I have anxiety. But no, I was just really good at bottling it up. And I was wearing this
Mhm.
mask all day. And it led to the eating disorder and all this lovely stuff that didn't have to happen. Right.
Mhm.
And so that's my cautionary tale to a lot of these students I go talk to is like, just because you might not be at like a 10 out of 10 emergency level doesn't mean you can't still reach out and ask for help. And there's five main things that I did, which
Mhm.
I know if other people implement, they can do too. It doesn't mean this is
Mhm.
the only thing you can do, but if you don't mind, I'll share those really quick. So I've been over them a little bit already. The
Mhm.
first thing is a phrase I love that's called amor fati. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, Cheryl. Amor fati is Latin. It stands for like a love of fate. You just choose to love what happens to you. This was your destiny. This was what was supposed to happen in your life. So instead of deflecting and using the victim mentality, why me? This is not fair. No. This was supposed to happen to me, and how can I use this to my advantage? How
Mhm.
could this have been worse, and how can I grow from this?
Mhm.
So it's just a love of the fate of your fate, right? As
Mhm.
opposed to deflecting and blaming the world for all your problems. It's essentially taking ownership. That's what it
Mhm.
is. Amor fati. The
Mhm.
second one is my focus. And I alluded to this. I got really, really good at practicing only allowing my brain to focus on what I can control. And
Mhm.
I think a lot of us, we start to waste energy on things we can't change, like the weather is my favorite example. How
Mhm.
often do you hear people complain and moan about the weather and they
Mhm.
can't change it? You know what I mean? And so I got
Mhm.
really good at just practicing my focus. All right, what can I control and what can't I control? I'm going to only go to this column here, what I can control. The third thing was I call it Belgian horses, and I can get into that example if you want. But essentially, I got really particular about who I surrounded myself with. My big thing was like I wanted my circle to be like legit humans who were going to help pick me up if I needed it, as opposed to tear me down.
Mhm.
And the example I give with Belgian horses is, the average Belgian horse can pull about 12,000 pounds. Belgian horses are the strongest horses on the planet. They're like the horses in those Coors Light commercials.
Mhm.
What's fascinating is when you put one Belgian horse next to another Belgian horse, you would think they pull 24,000 pounds. 12 plus 12 is 24. What happens is they pull at least on an average about 36,000 pounds. Because when one is next to another, it tries to outduel that one and outdo it. And when that one starts getting outdone, it tries to level up and it levels up and it
Mhm.
levels up. And so that's what I've done is as I've gotten older and a little bit wiser, I've tried to be around people who level me up as opposed to tear me
Mhm.
down or who are into like things I'm not really into. You know what I mean? The fourth thing was strategic adversity, and we can get into that later if you want. I just got the days I didn't have God or life throw adversity into my life. I started to choose, let's practice my resilience by putting adversity into my life in a strategic way. Saunas, cold showers, tough workouts, try new food, have a tough conversation, anything that steps out of my comfort zone. And
Mhm.
last but not least is the one I've been over is I just asked for help. So if those
Mhm.
four things didn't work and I was still struggling, I
Mhm.
would have the courage to ask someone for help that I know,
Mhm.
trusted, and loved. Does
Mhm.
that make sense?
Absolutely. I just love that strategic adversity. That is
Yeah, yeah,
amazing. And there's two other things. Another thing I wanted to mention is as you were going through this process of how you were practicing, in repetitive, positive, outcomes of everything that you were going through, you were actually changing the patterns in your brain. You were changing your neural pathways. And that's
correct.
one thing I really wanted to highlight because I think people understand a little bit more how now, and especially if they listen to my show, because we talk about it a lot, the plasticity of the nervous system and the malleability and the flexibility of our brains. And if you're telling yourself something over and over and over again, or you're playing that reel, it's like a snowball rolling down the Rocky Mountains, and it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more powerful. And it's going to run you over. But if you take those thoughts, those negative thoughts, and make them positive, it has the other effect. And what we tell ourselves, what we give our brain to think about is what we eventually do become.
100%, 100%. Our mind is so powerful. It's almost freaky to think about.
Mhm.
the most important conversation you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. And I'm sure you've obviously been over that. Neuroplasticity is 100% a real thing. For me, it allowed me to change kind of my natural default pattern. For so many years, my brain would go to like the worst case scenario. I'm very pessimistic, things I can't change. And then through repetition and practice, I was able to change kind of those neural pathways to where like now my natural default is optimism and like, what can I do to change this? What's in my control? You know what I mean? And that took practice and reps. And as you know, that's all it takes sometimes. So yeah, no, that's a really good point. That's a very good point.
Did you know what you were doing? I mean, did you know that's what you were doing at the time?
I
Did you
did.
research?
Yeah, so I did once I post 23. So I started to get really into like neurochemistry, and I started to research stuff from neurosurgeons, and I started to watch different like cell biologists and stuff like that, try to learn as much as I can to make sure to see like if there's something out there I could do. And I got really into stoicism, which is a philosophy of like just really controlling your brain and like mastering like life isn't what happens to you, it's how you respond to what happens to you. And Andrew Huberman's that neuro professor or neuroscientist from Stanford. I started listening to a bunch of his stuff from a young age. I read a book called Mind Power, which is a great one. If anyone out there needs a read, that's a good one. And so I did start to see that and start to notice that and realize what was happening. I also knew that if I half-assed it, it wasn't going to take effect. And so that was huge, was I had this like baseline knowledge. Okay, this is what's possible. And so in order to get there, I needed to do it on a daily basis. This needed to be my commitment. I needed to go all in to change these typical default patterns of my brain. And so, yeah, I obviously learned more over the years, but as a 23-year-old in the hospital, I had some of that baseline understanding, like this is possible. And now it's just a matter of walking the walk and not just talking the talk, you know?
Have you ever read the books by Dr. Norman Doidge?
I've not.
He has two books that are absolutely fantastic. One is the first one is The Mind That Changes Itself. And then the second one is The Brain's Way of Healing. And they're both just such wonderful books. So full of wonderful information as well as very hopeful, stories and positive outcomes. So it is amazing that how powerful our mind is, which is really disturbing when you think of how much time we listen to what other people are telling us, like the media and even friends and families. The ones who aren't the what kind of horses were they?
Belgian horses.
Yes, the ones who aren't the
Belgian.
ones that are the more like the pack animals or the donkeys or whatever. But you have to surround yourself with people who have that same type of mentality.
Yeah, and what was a really big key for me was when I first started getting chronically sick with chronic kidney disease, and I had to get all these surgeries, I was getting all these infections. I remember noticing in the hospital, some people with really severe like cancer or severe issues were in like a good mood and they had a great outlook on life, and other people were like borderline suicidal and depressed, and kind of how I was for most of my life. And I thought to myself, okay, like what's the difference here? Like this person is handling it really good and this person is handling it poorly. At least that's what it looks like. And that started to spark my curiosity from the beginning, which to your point kind of led to, all right, like let's get really good at training my brain and using my mind to my advantage. And as you know, like the placebo effect is a real thing, 100% a real thing. And that was I think really key. And there was a particular moment when I was in the ER in San Diego. I remember there was this kid who had like really bad burns on him. He fell into a fire pit on the 4th of July. But he was like he's like, hey, it happens, like such a good mood, kind of making a joke out of it. And there was this lady next to me. So I was in the middle. There was a curtain between the two of us. The one kid was like cracking jokes, like, hey, it is what it is. I'll handle it. The lady next to me had like a headache. And I ended up finding out she was fine. But she was just going on and on, complaining to the nurse about all these problems in her life. And I just remember sitting there in the middle, and I'm like thinking to myself, all right, there's this perspective and this example, which I was more like her. And there's this young kid. I remember he looked like a teenager who has all these terrible burns because he fell into a fire pit, maybe a little tipsy. Maybe but I remember just sitting there thinking, okay, like I can go down one of those two paths. Right now, I'm usually leaning towards what this lady is doing. And that to me was like the first kind of initial aha moment where I'm like, okay, like I can get better at dealing with this and channeling my mind to my advantage, to your point.
Mhm. I've spoken to quite a few people who have ditched the victim mentality. And once they did, I was probably one of those people too. It was just magic happened once. And a lot of my issues were because of the people I was hanging around with.
Yeah, I really do think it's human nature. I think as
Hmm.
humans, our natural default, all the way back from, the caveman times was that loud noise signals danger.
Hmm.
And so I just think it's our human nature to, from a young age, when we face adversity or something happens we don't want to happen, our brain immediately goes to, oh, this is not fair. Why me? Cry,
Hmm.
let's play the victim card. We have to train ourselves out of that. It's a lot of like unlearning.
Hmm.
And that took me 23 years to finally get to, but better late than never, and
Hmm.
you'll see it all the time. If you start to practice some of your awareness, I'm around people in the gym all day, different clients I train or audiences I speak to, and you'll see it, it's very complaining. It's very common, like complaining and the
Hmm.
victim mentality. It's just kind of, I
Hmm.
think, built into us unless we train
Hmm.
ourselves out of it.
hmm
And it's absolutely possible. I know I was literally like down here, and if I can get
hmm
from here to here, I know anyone can, because I was
hmm
the biggest mental pansy, and I would argue, probably the worst at handling adversity out of anyone on the planet.
hmm
And I got a lot better at it just through practice and reps and learning the power of our mind and neuroplasticity and all those lovely things. So
hmm I actually had to break up with my best and dearest friend of 30 years. And, it's really it's awkward because how do you tell somebody that you've been best and dearest friends with for 30 years that you
yeah,
haven't liked them for the past 15 and you had been
yeah,
trying to figure out how to break up with them for the past 10? Like I said, awkward. But she had just gone down to such a level of negativity that was I mean, even one mutual friend described it as, she's so condescending and she's so arrogant about it, and everything was so negative. So I decided what I was going to do was flip the script and start, saying positive things about other people and just being a little bit more uplifting and, encouraging and positive. And she actually looked at me and said, "What is wrong with you?"
wow,
She said, "I do not like the way that you're acting." And I'm like, "Okay, well, see ya." And
yeah,
once I broke up with her, it was amazing how many really wonderful, positive people showed up in my life after that. And it was also amazing how light I felt. And those nagging, nasty headaches that I had been getting on a regular basis, they disappeared.
isn't that wild? I
Crazy.
think that is, you had a level of maturity and wisdom there that I think a lot of the audiences I speak to would struggle with because they're middle school students, high schoolers, college kids.
Mhm,
I think the one thing I like to use an example in that situation is, I'll go talk to a college or a high school or middle school, and I'll ask them, all right, the last 5 people you've texted, would you be confident reaching out to them like in a life or death situation for help? Like if you're
mhm,
not proud of those last 5 people you've texted,
mhm,
or you wouldn't reach out to them for help in a time of need, you got something to change. You know what I'm saying?
mhm.
Like
Right.
if you text them and say, hey, I need your help, and
Mhm,
you don't think they'd be there for you, then you got to change
mhm,
something.
mhm,
Are you proud of the last 5 people you've texted or the last 5 people you've called? And
mhm,
sometimes some of these younger audiences take it a little too literally. I'll have kids walk
mhm.
up to me after a speech, and one kid will say to another kid, hey, you're not a Belgian horse. We can't be friends. Like that's literally
Oh.
what they'll say. So obviously there's a way to do it. Like it sounds like you distance yourself and you're like, hey, you spoke your truth. And
Mhm,
anyways, that's a huge thing. That really is. And it's so cliche, but it's amazing how cliche things are almost always true.
mhm,
Is you are who you surround yourself with.
mhm, mhm,
And I know in college, I surrounded myself with a lot of guys in my fraternity and sorority girls that
mhm,
weren't good for me.
mhm,
Um, I lived with people that weren't good for me. And once I started to get really strict with my inner circle and kept my circle tight and small, that
mhm,
just helped. Obviously, now it was still up to me to do the other things I could control.
mhm,
But that's a huge factor. That's a huge
mhm,
factor, and I come back to the whole mentality of like I'm going to be a thermostat, not a thermometer. I don't care
mhm,
what type of energy I walk into. I'm in control of how I feel, no matter what news I get from the doctor or what happens to me tomorrow.
mhm,
Just getting that awareness, like, hey, we can control and we can dictate how we feel. No one's going to get in your brain and make you feel a certain way unless you let them. And so that was something I started to really enjoy and kind of got a confident kick from the more and more I was able
Mhm.
to practice that.
I think I might even use that as the title of this episode. Be a thermostat, not a thermometer. I love
Yeah,
that.
that's a big one. Yeah, and it's, if you think about it, like most people, when something good happens, we're in a great mood. When something bad
Mhm,
happens, we're in a bad mood. I'm not saying you shouldn't be in a great mood when good things
mhm,
happen, but if you're constantly dictated by what happens around you, you're very vulnerable. And that was my
mhm,
situation when I wasn't
mhm,
injured or getting surgeries and winning games and getting straight A's. Oh my gosh, I was the best person to be around. But the
mhm,
second something bad happened, in air quotes, immediately depressed, stressed, anxious, not fun to
mhm,
be around, quiet, put on a mask type of thing, And
mhm,
so that's a pretty crappy way to live your life, in my opinion. I think most humans would be doing themselves a major service to themselves if we can get to the point where like we can control how we feel no matter what happens.
mhm,
I love it here in Kansas City. So I'm in Kansas City.
mhm,
There's diehard Chiefs fans everywhere. Kansas City Chiefs football. When the Chiefs lose, there are so many people at my work the next day that I'll talk to that are just sad and down, and they'll be in a week of depression until the next time they win. And it just blows my mind. Like, all right, we're watching a game on TV with a bunch of
mhm,
people we don't know. No matter how
mhm,
we feel, we can't change the outcome. And you're going to let these
mhm,
strangers and the outcome of a game they're playing dictate your emotions. Like, that
mhm,
to me just doesn't make any sense. And so that's what something I've started to get really good at over the years, just by practice and just by
mhm,
default, because I had nothing better to do. When you're sitting in a hospital bed with blurry vision and tons of tubes everywhere, that was, I wanted to try to use my time wisely. And
mhm,
so yeah, it's interesting how that works.
mhm. That is funny that you should mention that because apparently, well, I'm not much of a sports fan. Um, and of course, the Denver Broncos are really having a very difficult season, and they were last year too. And
Yeah,
I
oh yeah.
have a few friends that, are very much into, their whole week is either made or destroyed by what happens on that football field. And it was like, wow, why would you give anybody else all that power?
Yeah. And see, that was me for 23 years, 24 years. Only the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years have I started to take that power back and put it in my
Mm,
own hands. Um, I mean, that's just huge. I mean, it's
mhm,
amazing what you can. And I have a weird theory about that. I think, as I've gotten more passion in my life and I found more things I enjoy, I
mhm,
stopped trying to go for outside external things for passion and joy. And so,
mhm,
I don't know. We can go down a whole rabbit hole with sports fandom.
mhm,
I think passion is great, but yeah, to your point, that's the one thing. Like, I'm not going to let what this doctor tells me
mhm,
dictate my emotions, or what happens on the TV screen dictate how I
mhm,
feel, or the weather. That's another huge one. It's
mhm,
unbelievable to me how many of my clients, or if I go to a speaking gig and the weather's bad, all the staff at
mhm,
the school is just complaining the whole time before my speech about the weather. I'm like, guys, what are we doing? What what's happening? But I was like that for so long. I mean, that was
mhm,
me forever. You know what I mean?
mhm,
So I know what it's like, and I know you can also change it, and how much
mhm.
power and how much more joy you can get from your life if you start to change that.
Mhm. I want to talk about that mask again because you have mentioned it, before, and I even wrote it down and circled it because when you are wearing that mask, it is exhausting.
100%. It's an act. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm,
if you were told, "Hey, go act like this type of person," it would be
mhm,
so draining because it's not really you. You're not being
mhm,
authentic. I
mhm,
remember I would always get like 8 hours of sleep, but I never felt rested growing up.
mhm,
I was always exhausted because I was having to put on a poker face and hide all these things.
mhm,
And it is exhausting. That's the best way to describe it.
mhm,
When you're not actually being yourself and you're not being honest and transparent, it is so draining. It's unbelievable. And
mhm,
you kind of mentioned, like a weight off your shoulders, like a breath of fresh air, when you sort of spoke your mind to your friend, and kind of got a better way of managing your relationship with her.
mhm,
That happened to me in the sense, like, once I took ownership, like radical ownership, radical transparency, and radical
mhm,
acceptance, those things, all of a sudden, like, it wasn't that tough or draining to get through a day. And so, to
mhm,
your point, for 20 plus years, mainly up until I was graduating from high school, it was exhausting because I was constantly being someone I wasn't. And I think there's a lot of people out there, not just men, but also women, kids,
mhm,
teenagers, elderly people. I mean, that's a real
mhm,
thing. I think authenticity is like the highest form of frequency, in my opinion. Maybe even
Mhm.
on an actual like factual level, it might be. But that
Mhm.
was so clear in my own life is I was just a BS artist. It
Mhm.
was just I was really good at it, and it
Mhm.
was also extremely exhausting. And
Mhm.
I feel like I aged 20 years as a teenager because of it.
Mhm.
And there's a level of freedom, that whole cliche, like the truth will set you free. It's really true.
Mhm.
Like when
Mhm.
you're just yourself and you don't
Mhm.
hide necessarily behind a mask or a
Mhm.
front, it's amazing
Mhm.
what you can do and what you can achieve. And that for me was the key to the city to start to get better.
Mhm.
Um, from a young age, for whatever reason, I just think it was just kind of the surroundings I was in. I just thought to myself, okay, like, no, 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 it's a weakness. Don't ask for help. Don't be honest.
Mhm.
Don't tell the truth. No conflict. I don't want to be a
Mhm.
problem to anyone. So I'm going to
Mhm.
hide how I really feel, or hide that this is struggling. I'm struggling with this right now. And obviously that
Mhm.
just turned into more and more turmoil.
Mhm.
So it's a mistake that I hope many people can start to self-correct or never make, by doing
Mhm.
my speaking gigs or podcasts like yours, and et
Mhm.
cetera.
So when did you decide that you were going to speak about this? I
Yeah.
mean, to get out in the public, because that's putting yourself in a position that is incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah.
And to tell your life story like that, what was the catalyst that made you say, I'm going to do this?
So when I was a junior in high school, I got to the point where I was like, I had suicidal thoughts, severe depression, anxiety. I was 120 pounds, eating disorder. I had to drop out of high school the last 3 months of my junior year. And I went to a rehab facility in Wisconsin. I specialized in mental health and eating disorders. It was in
Mhm.
Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. So I was there for the last 3 months. I got out after a couple months, after 3 months, 4 months, and I did summer school to get back caught up with school. And when I came back my senior year, everyone was wondering, where the hell did you go? Because one day I was just gone. And they
Mhm.
knew I wasn't dead, but they also didn't know where I was. And I was a fairly well known person. I was on the varsity sports and all this stuff. You know what I mean? So when I got back, one of my good buddies wanted to write an article about me and all the things that I was struggling with and I overcame. And we put that in
Hmm.
the school newspaper. It ended up winning like a national award. So right there, that was one of the first things was I got hundreds of messages in person or on Facebook from students saying, "Hey, that helped me a lot hearing that you were struggling with this and you overcame it."
Wow.
So that was the first light bulb. The second one was my counselor in high school recommended I go share my story to some of the different classrooms or sports teams at the high school because
Mhm.
they have some girls or some boys who are struggling with similar stuff. And I was totally
Mhm.
against it. I was like, no one wants to hear about. No one cares. Whatever. Finally, she convinced me enough to go do it. And after my first speech talking about three of the different girls sports teams at my high school,
Mhm.
it went over to the point where like they got so much value from it that I started getting asked to go speak here and then speak here and speak here.
Mhm.
And what I realized was like there's value in the stuff I've struggled with because it's not just it's very universal. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and that was when the light bulb started to go off where I'm like, okay, if I can start to like speak my truth and share how I've overcome these things, everything from like eating disorders to perfectionism to injuries, it's not just like one thing. It was a lot of
Mhm.
different things that a lot of people could relate to. I could really help these audiences.
Mhm.
And so it took off from there. And I started to realize this can be like a higher calling and something I can do that makes all of my pain worth it. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Oh, absolutely.
And then when I got out to
Absolutely.
San Diego, my favorite class was public speaking. We had to take that class our freshman year. I loved it, and my chemistry teacher wanted me to share my story to some of the students, and that went over
Mhm.
well. And it just started taking off from there. And the fascinating thing that I realized was how many people were struggling with similar things or who have
Mhm.
struggled with similar things. And even if we're not going to go specific, one thing we all have in common as humans is we're all going to have something happen that we don't want to happen. Adversity, that's
Mhm.
just part of being a human.
Mhm.
And part of like the main point of my whole life story is I got a lot better at dealing with adversity. And if people as a whole, especially at a young age, if we can learn how to deal with adversity and be more resilient and stress
Mhm.
management, it's amazing what we can do with our life because we're with our brains, to your point, we've talked about today, like 24/7. We're with our
Mhm.
own mind, our own self 24/7. So no matter how great your education is or how amazing you are at sports or music, if your mind's not right, none of that matters. And so when you can start to get really good and really clear between the ears, you become a better wife, husband, you become better at your career, you really optimize your life. And so that was the one thing that I realized too, is even if not everyone in the audience can specifically relate to the stuff I've overcome, they can all relate to loss or adversity or stress or feelings of anxiety. And that was the kind of the main factor that really got the ball rolling, which has been great to see. And even today, after speaking gigs, when I first started, I thought I was just going to get a bunch of like bros come up to me, you know, a bunch of like the
Right.
dudes. And you know, after these speaking gigs, I'll get all walks of life come up to me. Everything from like the older teachers to some of the girls, the cheerleaders, the sports, the really quiet kids who I can tell kind of seem lonely. I mean, all walks of life will come up to me afterwards, and it's because we all have that in common, right? And so yeah, that's been huge, and that's where it started. So it was really the article that I was written about me my senior year in high school, and then my counselor just said, "Hey, look, you have it." Kind of what you said. She told me the same thing. She said, "Hey, from the outside looking in, you're a varsity captain. You're this, you're that. Your resume looks amazing. And now everyone knows that you were behind the scenes struggling with this, and this, and you've overcome it. You've got to share this with some of these other people face to face." And I kind of thought this was ridiculous, but eventually, obviously, I started to realize, okay, like there's something here for sure.
I really love the fact that the first time you did it, and you were talking to a lot of girls. I don't know if it was strictly girls, but
It
their
was.
response, see, to me, that is amazing because, I'm thinking back to high school, which was a really long time ago. But, that just would not have happened that one of the guys, especially an athlete or, one of the really
Yeah.
cool kids would come in and talk about something so personal and get that kind of response. I think we probably would have been dumbfounded and wouldn't
Yeah.
even have known how to respond. But I just love the fact that they were so open and, really embraced what you were saying. I mean,
Yeah.
human suffering is pretty much universal.
It
Everybody
is.
does suffer.
Yeah. And you know, no matter where you're from, obviously, like I'm very big on saying, like, look, I've had a lot of adversity in my life, but I don't have it worse than anyone else. Like, it always could be worse, and there's always someone who has it worse.
Hmm.
And so that's just kind of the first groundwork. But yes, to your point, I was shocked that they got value from it. And at that point, you know, my whole secret was out, so to speak,
Right.
because this article had been read by everyone in the school. And I think it was fascinating to your point. Like everyone started to realize the whole mentality around the school was like, okay, like we all have this one thing in common. Like we're all going to experience adversity, trauma, some sort of suffering in our life. That's just part of being a human.
Hmm.
And if we don't take it upon ourselves to get better at responding to that, then we're just setting ourselves up for failure. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? And
Yeah,
so
I do.
I think instead of being naive, we ought to prepare the best we
Hmm.
can. So when something does happen, because it will, we can respond to it in the best way possible and use it to our advantage,
Hmm.
as opposed to pretending like it's nothing ever is bad going to happen. And then once it
Hmm.
does, we crumble or we
Hmm.
fall back into addiction or really negative coping mechanisms,
Hmm.
like I did for so long. You know, my coping mechanism was control, really severe eating, really strict grades, and also constantly lying and putting on a mask. And obviously, that
Hmm.
quickly got me nowhere. It almost killed me, you know. And so
Hmm.
that was really cool. And I think that for me, had it not have been a group of high school girls and seeing how much that impacted them, that might not
Hmm.
have, if it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't have seen the value as much. But like
Hmm.
you said, it was really interesting how that worked out. Um, yeah, no, it's fascinating. I know next month I've got a speech in front of a bunch of girls sports teams in Chillicothe. And, you know, I walk in, I'm the 6'5" tattooed up guy. But the one thing I have in common with every single one of those teenage girls is I've experienced stress and adversity and trauma, and they have and or they will. And
Hmm.
so what I've learned can spread onto them. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm. Yep. I think they call that a pattern interrupt when somebody walks in like that,
Yeah.
right? That's because that's not what you're expecting. And just right from the very get-go, you have everybody's attention. That's kind of the
Yeah.
reaction I get when people find out that, I'm a martial artist. It's just like, well, wait a minute, this does not compute. So it's really funny. But, going back to, when after you had given that talk and it was like, okay, your secret was out and it was out to the entire high school. Did you have a moment of almost like regret or remorse or, again, being so vulnerable that everybody knew your secret. You can't get that genie back in the bottle.
I didn't because now before I realized, because I thought I was like one of the only people. So at first, when the article was written about me,
Mm-hmm.
I remember the day it came out, we had a bunch of students walk around with stacks of our school newspaper and they'd pass them out to every classroom. I was hiding in the bathroom when this was happening. I didn't want to be seen. Once I started to realize how many people said like, oh no, this helped me because I struggle with this too, or I've
Mm-hmm.
had this too, or my brother has this. This has been a huge help. I'm going to show him that. That's when all of the regret and remorse went away completely.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was that to me was the biggest thing right there, was to see
Mm-hmm.
that. And what it really did was it really like just destigmatized everything. The
Mm-hmm.
one way you destigmatize any subject is you start to talk about it. You have like an
Mm-hmm.
open dialogue about it. And instead of beating around the bush and pretending like this thing isn't real,
Mm-hmm.
let's face it head on. Let's be honest with ourselves, like I started to do,
Mm-hmm.
and attack this mental health, or the stress, or the trauma and adversity that we
Mm-hmm.
all have faced or will face. And so
Mm-hmm.
once I got the feedback, like people got value from it, immediately I didn't
Mm-hmm.
regret it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing I'm big on is, being vulnerable, I think, is a sign of strength. And I don't think, I know. It's one of the most courageous things
Mm-hmm.
you can do. Lying is such a weak thing. I
Mm-hmm.
think if you want to come across as weak, you lie. And I'm not saying everyone needs to get a megaphone and blare to the whole
Mm-hmm.
world all their problems and look for pity, because that's not what I wanted either.
Mm-hmm.
I was sharing my story and explaining how I overcame it to sort of help other people. I didn't need anyone's pity. Like this is meant to happen to me. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I think being courageous and being vulnerable obviously go hand in hand. But as a
Mm-hmm.
young boy in America, I didn't really connect those dots after,
Mm-hmm.
for a long time. And yeah, no, that's the biggest thing right there, was me realizing that. And then once I saw the student body got value from that, that was
Mm-hmm.
huge.
Just as you said, a young boy, in America going through this. What I have seen recently is that there is a lot more focus. There needs to be, I think, a little bit more, but there's a lot of focus on men's mental health, boys' mental health. It's really starting to be something that we talk about on a regular basis. I've had a lot of the men who are spearheading this on my show, and I just think it's so fantastic that men can kind of come together and share their problems and be open about it, share them with the people that, they trust. And I see this like community of brotherhood that's really coming together.
No, that's amazing to hear, and I see it on my end as well. And you said pattern interruption. I think that's one of the best things that, without even saying a word, when I walk into a school, I look like I would not be talking about the things I talk about, right?
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
right there, that just breaks the ice with a lot of these boys in the audience, or men in the audience, but also the ladies too, and the girls, and everyone in between. Um, and that's the coolest thing about it.
Hmm.
One thing I like to do during speaking gigs is I'll put up my resume, all the things I've accomplished, but I won't say it's mine. And I'll ask people, now, does that look like someone who struggle with an eating disorder, or depression, or anxiety, or body image? And no one will say yes. But then once they realize that's my resume, it's like that light bulb goes off. I have a lot of different celebrities or famous athletes I'll throw up on a screen that have been public about their own mental health struggles.
Hmm.
And that's another great way for people to realize, like, hey, like, this is not just like a you thing and something to be ashamed of.
Hmm.
Especially because it's everyone has it. And to your
Hmm.
point, I think that the emphasis on the men and the boys, that needs to continue to happen, because obviously everyone struggles with it. We all have different levels of mental
Hmm.
health, just like we all have different levels of financial health, of
Hmm.
spiritual health. But with the boys and the men out there, theirs seems to be a little bit more severe. They have high rates of
Hmm.
suicide and all these things.
Hmm.
So yeah, no, I think that's amazing what you said on your end, and I've noticed the same thing with me.
So I have like, okay, here's the $1 million question.
Yes,
Is there a book in your future?
yeah, that is. What's funny is almost every podcast I'm on, or when I do speaking gigs, I'll do Q&A afterwards,
Hmm.
and at least one student will ask me that, or one podcast host will
Hmm.
ask me that. There definitely is. I I'm not exactly sure how it will look or what it'll look like, but
Hmm.
absolutely there is. I think, once again, kind of like me doing speaking gigs, I think that would just help even more. Yeah, there's something on the horizon for sure. I'll have to find someone who knows what they're doing in that regard, but yeah, no, that'll be coming.
I kind of figured. I mean, I was hoping that there would be because I think it would be fantastic. And the nice thing about writing a book, you can reach even more people.
Yeah, and exactly. And what I would
Hmm.
make sure that's like reiterated is like I'm nothing special. I have a
Hmm.
belly button just like you. I'm a human being. I can't emphasize like how down in the dumps and rock bottom I was. I mean, eating
Hmm.
disorder, self-harm, suicidal, terribly mentally weak, like where I am now. And I didn't go from here to here just because I have like some special superpower. It's stuff that
Hmm.
anyone can do. You know what I mean? I just
Hmm.
kept it very simple. The KISS method, keep it simple, stupid.
Hmm.
And I did things that anyone else is capable of doing and can
Hmm.
do. It's not like I have some magic pill. And that's like the biggest thing I wanted to make sure
Hmm.
everyone knows is like it's not some magical you know martial arts move I learned that made me improve and turn into a better version of myself. This is something that can be universal and anyone else can start to adapt or use and implement in their life.
Well, that magic pill really is that little gelatinous mess between our
Yes.
ears. That
Right.
is the magic pill. We all have it.
And having enough self-awareness
Hmm.
and open-mindedness to realize the opportunity there.
Hmm.
Exactly. For so long I remember I would get tons of great help from people and I started to learn about that, but I was so narrow-minded and I was so used to like
Hmm.
self-sabotaging. I'm like, no, that's a bunch of hickey,
Hmm.
BS.
Hmm.
But yes, right there, that's true. That's
Hmm.
100%. Once you have the ego pulled away and the awareness that you can start to take ownership with what's between your
Hmm.
ears,
Hmm.
that's amazing. That will change everyone's life.
Yep.
100%.
Awareness and self-reflection, which at first it can be a little bit terrifying because you're afraid of what you're going to find, but it's so empowering.
That was, yeah. So the way I finish all my speeches, and this might be a good kind of near the end for this one, is I always give people the example of like a buffalo and a cow. You ever heard of
Hmm.
that story, buffalo and cows?
No.
So when a storm is coming, cows and buffalo, they can both
Yes.
sense when a storm is coming.
Hmm.
And what cows do, if there's no fences, we're just like in an open range, in an open
Hmm.
field, cows will sense the storm and they'll run away from the storm.
Hmm.
What's interesting though is the storm eventually catches up with them, but the cows, they don't stop. They keep
Hmm.
running with the storm. They're moving with the storm, kind of like the definition of insanity, trying the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. It doesn't happen. Now, the buffalo will sense the storm and they'll run into the storm. Yes, it's scary. Yes, there's fear. Yes, they have to face adversity and they have to face and confront the obstacle. But eventually the storm passes and they go through the storm. And on the other
Hmm.
side, they reap the benefits of green grass, fresh water, the rainbow. And that's essentially what I had to learn how to do in my life and what anyone
Hmm.
else can do. The obstacle is the way. I chose to go into the storm and stop being a cow, or as I like to say, a coward, and face the
Hmm.
things that were holding me back, which is
Hmm.
extremely scary. For the first 23 years of my life, I'd look at myself in the eyes at night when I brushed my teeth and I'd be lying to myself. I would never be honest and truly transparent and face the things that I knew were holding me back. Once I
Hmm.
decided to be a buffalo and not a cow and go into the storm like my arm says,
Hmm.
that's what changed everything for me. Yes, it was scary. Yes, there was trials and tribulations. It
Hmm.
wasn't all smooth sailing. It was a lot of 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. Eventually I got to the other side and anyone else is capable of that. And that was the key for me was choosing to face that, right? And be honest. And that is something that I know with all my heart anyone else can do if they choose
Hmm.
to.
So, Jack, how can people get a hold of you? Where can they find you? And if they wanted to reach out, for either to hire you for speaking
Yeah.
or, consultation, coaching, how can they reach out?
Yeah. So you guys can go to my website, jacksernettinspires.com. And it's it's a work in progress. I don't actually think that you can contact me through there. You can check out all my content though.
Hmm.
Testimonial videos, old speaking, all the fun stuff in there, different podcasts I've been on. You guys can find me on social media. My Instagram is I am Jack Sernett, or you can just search in Jack Sernett on any of the search bars. An email I give out to any podcast or speaking gig because I get a lot of students or even
Hmm.
listeners afterwards that might reach out to me and email me, or people who want to book me at their middle school, high school, or college.
Hmm.
Contact at jacksernett.com. And if anyone just wants to talk, it's amazing. I get a high from learning about humans and hearing their stories.
Mhm.
And I'm a talker, if you couldn't tell already by this whole podcast. So I love to talk. I was on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and two of their listeners reached out to me, and we hopped in a phone call for 5 minutes, and that was great. And I brought as much value as I could. So if anyone wants to reach out through email, we can go from there too. But I really appreciate your time, letting me share my story, and I hope people got value from it.
Well, it has been wonderful having you on the show. I loved listening to your story. I love your passion. I love your positivity. I'm still a little bit blown away that you were 6'5" and 120 pounds.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I'm glad to see you. I mean, you
yeah, yeah.
again, you look like the picture of just health and vitality, and it's really lovely to see.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Do you have any final, just little pearl of wisdom to leave with the listeners before we sign off?
Yeah, I think two quick things is I think everyone ought to sear in their brain the 10-90 rule. Life is
Mm,
10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond. And you can get really good and masterful at that
mhm,
90%. And number two is we are all so much more resilient and capable than we think. We all have resilience and strength in our DNA.
mhm,
If we think about, we talked about kind of your family lineage before we hopped in the podcast.
mhm.
I love, is that how you say your name in American at least?
Yes.
So think about all the different generations, hundreds of years of people down
Mhm,
your bloodline that survived war, famine, struggle, Mother Nature, in order for you to be alive today. They
mhm.
had to be strong, badass mother effers. Otherwise, they would have died off.
Right.
And I think it's amazing how easy it is for us to forget how badass we really are and how resilient we
Mhm,
really are. All of
mhm,
us alive today, our bloodline is the epitome of resilience and strength. And I think it's important that everyone remembers that. And if you don't tap into that on a regular basis or kind of friendly reminder and reflection, it's easy to forget. And I just wanted people to remember that we are so much more resilient than we think,
mhm,
and we're capable of way more than we could ever imagine.
mhm. That was fantastic. I loved hearing that. And that's a
Yeah,
really great reminder. As a matter of fact, I do think of my ancestors a lot because of what the things that they had gone through. And even my dad, he came over twice to the United States. The first time over, he was just a baby and he was a year old. And 1 year later, he had a near fatal accident when he pulled a pot of scalding chicken soup all over himself. He was
wow.
in the hospital for 6 months. My grandmother never left his side. She couldn't speak English. She didn't understand English. My grandfather would walk after working in the steel mills all day, walk 12 miles to go visit him. I mean, it was a nightmare. And when I think of that, it's like, I really come from some pretty resilient stock. And I think we all do. We don't give them credit.
Correct. And we are all capable of enduring and overcoming and conquering whatever happens to us. Otherwise, our bloodline would have died off 100 years ago. And so you're exactly right. It's all in you and within you. We just got to remind ourselves of that.
Great, great way to end the show. Jack, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I think you were
Hey, I appreciate
fantastic.
it. Thank you. It was a great conversation. Thank you.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening and do share this episode with everyone you know. I think this has been one of the most important episodes that I've done in a long time, well, I've done some great ones, but I think this is something that everybody needs to hear, especially if you have middle schoolers, high schoolers, college kids, that going through that, it's not easy growing up. And it seems like it's getting harder and harder as time goes on. So if you see somebody who's struggling, who needs a little bit of encouragement, uplifting advice, send them this link because it can really help a lot of people. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.